Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I guess that we are live, and it is the 28th of November. And earlier today, I finished running session, I think session number 7 of the kids at the library, and it was a fun session. Once again, last time they really had their butts handed to them. They decided to take on the sea hag, and they decided to go head to head, and bring an army of bullywugs and the people from their ship, and fight the sea hag and her minions. Didn't go so well. It was kind of a standstill. They weren't exactly routed, but had the battle continued to go on, it probably would have been a TPK, just by virtue of the fact that there were a lot of combatants on either side. And just the law of large numbers means that you'll probably die. But the sea hag ran off because she got put into a position where she was in serious danger of getting killed herself. So she took off, her minions take off. Okay, great, the party doesn't die. But, they've kind of had their butts handed to them. And so it was a bit of a learning experience at that point, and now the kids have to reconvene. What do we do now? And, setting things up in terms of fiction, if you will, I let them know, okay, the sea hag seems to have flown the coop for now. Her minions, which I think they're called like sea spawn, they're in the Volo's Guide to Monsters, I think. Well, they're gone as well. The bullywugs are really they're kind of cautiously optimistic that maybe she'll never come back. But maybe she will. Maybe they're going to be in big trouble, and they don't want that. And meantime, the men at the ship, well, they're not super happy that a few of them died. I think 5 of them died during this combat. A couple of other guys have died. I mean, they were supposed to be red shirts anyway. We'll get to red shirts beforehand, because initially I had this idea in my head that maybe it would be a little bit like Sinbad, where the guys get picked off by dinosaurs or whatever. A couple of them did during the first venture, part of the approach to Witch Island by the pterodactyls. But here, at least one player is really into this idea of leading an army. It's funny because he's a cleric, and he seems to be into leading an army and gunpowder. And he finally asked today, is there any gunpowder or any cannons have we ever seen anything like that? I was like, no, as a matter of fact, you haven't. They don't exist here. But we kind of like this idea that he's a little bit nuts at this point and is trying to invent something. Maybe how do you know that you're not the guy that invented the cannon? So we get a bit of a laugh out of that. But at this point, they have to make a decision. What do we do now? Because there's one character that's got this little sigil, tattooed on his head by the sea hag, and essentially he's under a geas. He's going to. I played it fast and loose with what happens, but he's going to die if he doesn't do what she says. He's going to take psychic damage all the time. And he goes contrary to what she said, and roll a disadvantage. He's just going to have a yucky time, and he's getting awful dreams in the meantime. So I'm feeling kind of bad, but not exactly, because it's sort of a railroad, but not really. It's a consequence of what happened. It's a consequence of them attacking the sea hag on their own with half the party, and they start to find out, well, geez, they can't kill everything. They're not super powerful beings. There's things out there that can really hand your butt to you. So you need to be a little bit more intelligent in how you play, which is part of the learning experience of playing Dungeons and Dragons or any role-playing game. So I don't feel super bad. They don't have to go that way because they could just let him die, which they had that decision. Maybe we should just let him die. Maybe we should cut the thing off his head. Well, seems that every time that's happened, somebody's died. Maybe we should kill him and then try to cut the thing off his head and then try to resurrect him. Oh gosh, I'm just going to really do that. There were some funny discussions these kids had, so that was a lot of fun. But at that point, they finally make the decision to, take the hike up to the 4th dome to get the Eye of the Serpent. And so that's what happened for most of the rest of the venture. It was actually pretty cool. The youngest kid there remembered that he had turned into a frog and rode on one of the Rangers' owls, and saw a part of the layout. So he asked if he can do that again. So he rides on the owl, and he's actually able to do a bunch of recon to let him know exactly where this place is. That was pretty cool. That was pretty neat, and some creative thinking on this kid's part. But then they march up there, and they decide at this point, how are we going to deal with things? And they come across the dome, and the kid's already been able to tell them that the druid has already been able to tell them there's little footprints all over the place. They can't really tell what they are. They finally see what they are, and these little kind of circle things, and they're like about 4 or 5 feet apart. And it's obviously some kind of many-legged creature that's doing that, but they have no idea what it is. They think, is it centipedes, whatever. So they finally decide to blow on their war horns and see if they can lure whatever here is guarding this dome out. Kind of interesting, as opposed to going into the dome and sneaking things. They even had a discussion: do we want to give away our position or not? And they bring some people with them. They decide to bring 6 guys with them. And so I explained to them, well, these are red shirts. And then I said, well, what's red shirts? So I have to explain. Didn't your parents watch Star Trek? Maybe you have to ask your parents after this a while, later. Although I'm looking at their parents, a couple of their parents came in, setting the computer up, and I'm wondering, gosh, do they know what red shirts are? Would they call them yellow shirts? Because I'm looking, maybe they just watched Next Generation, because I'm thinking, oh, they look younger than I am. And I don't know if they really know about the original series and they get the red shirt reference. Maybe they do. They could be geeks. So I explained to them the show and how the people wore the red shirts, and so this kind of happens now in Dungeons and Dragons and other games where you've got these guys that go with you, and they might die because they're not important. They don't necessarily have a name. Although we named these guys, so we have 6 guys with them, and so they blow on their horns, and then they start to hear things coming out, and so they run. Some of them run up trees, and some of them hide on either edge of this big archway that's in this dome. And these scorpion people come out, and there's no scorpion people anywhere in the monster manual, as far as I know. I just took something that was something that looked cool. I think it might have been Volo's Guide to Monsters, and it's a centaur scorpion person. I just made up my own stats. You ripped them off something that seemed about appropriate. And they had spears, which they could attack with twice, because they could attack once with a spear, and they could do I think I decided they were polearm masters. They could whack somebody else with use a bonus action. I'm using the action economy with the spear afterwards, and they can sting with their tails too. So they actually have 3 attacks if they really want to, and they were formidable opponents. But our heroes were able to whittle them down, and actually fought pretty effectively against them. I found the spell command is an interesting spell in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't seem to have the limitation, and I could have missed it, in terms of the hit dice or the power level of the critter. And if you're able to, and I decided these things knew common, so he was commanding them to die, so they were pretty much doing the standard, they don't react for a round or two. Sort of thing. They kind of collapse. I think I let him get away with a couple rounds with these things where they just don't move. They kind of look like a bug, and they kind of look like a dead spider at that point. And so I said, at this point, you can attack them without I think I decided they could do max damage, because I'm looking at the rules. What are the rules for a helpless opponent? It doesn't say anything about being able to dispatch them right away. Looking at all the conditions, but it does seems that you've got an advantage against attacks. I think advantage is just laying there. So I decided, what the heck, you can whack it and do max damage to the thing, which wasn't going to kill it outright. But they had some pretty decent tactics. They went up trees. The red shirts were very effective, and I think they really liked that. The fact that these guys were able to do something, and none of the red shirts died either, which is pretty interesting. But they finally dispatched. It was a longer combat than I would have liked, because once again, I think it was just getting the kids to know what they're supposed to do and look things up. It really shouldn't have been as long as it was. It should have gone a lot faster. So I'm really trying to push for them to know what they're supposed to be able to do and learn what they're supposed to be able to do. And sometimes I think there was a bit of player indecision that made the turns a little bit shorter. It's funny because you kind of expect that from kids. It's weird because I've seen that from adults an awful lot, and I'm wondering, why do adults have that happen? Because I know what I want to do. Once or twice, and I played Circle of Hands earlier today, where I had this moment of waffling. Geez, I really want to do this or that, but it's like 2 or 3 seconds, and then I know what I'm going to do. I take, and it was there was a kind of a tactical decision there. But here it's just odd that I'm thinking as I'm going through this with the children, why does it take adults so long? Good question. Ask yourself that. Why is it taking you so long, kids? Adults. So but it was a fun combat. It took a little bit too long, but once it was over, they didn't know what to do. They went in the dome finally, and looked around, and they see that there's the babies of these critters. Because I think that what they do is they tried to parlay. They tried to talk to these scorpion people, and they didn't have a brilliant opening strategy. Asking about the eye of the serpent itself. They weren't using very much duplicity or sneakiness. They pretty much went there and said, we'd like to get the eye. Because they decided, why are we attacking these things if they haven't attacked us yet? As one of the players asked that. And so they all said, why are we playing murder hobos here? What do we do? And I was a bit unfair, but I suppose that was fair, because when they started talking to them, these scorpion people kind of were there, as part of the guardians of this eye of the serpent. And, that's what they're there for. And they finally decide, after some consultation, that yes, we'll feed you to our children, which are these little nymphs, which they found inside. So they're smashing the nymphs and smashing the eggs. They find these little scorpion nymphs and scorpion eggs, and scorpion people And he's smashing them happily. And of course, they don't realize that Mama's there, and that I have to make the stats for Mama up at that point. I really hadn't thought too much of what was going on over there, and hadn't put enough thought into what Mama was going to be like. So I pretty much made her more powerful. I'm completely pulling it out of my rear end, but it's easy enough now to understand the basic framework. And it was a much more difficult creature, and there was only one of them, so the party was able to defeat it relatively easily. However, it took a while, and it's taking a bunch of damage, and they're like, well, how many hit points does this have? It's really funny to see how these kids are paying close attention to how many hit points of damage they're doing to creatures and making notes of it. And they start saying, well, these creatures have 22 hit points. I'm like, wow, that's smart. They knew it right away. And they're doing the same thing with this creature would have something like 75 hit points, much more powerful. And they just kept kind of like, wow, how does it have this many? And then, here's the kicker. He decides to cast Hold Person on this creature, as well. Really, it's almost like an overpowered spell, because if they don't make their save, they're getting, for at least for a round, they're getting held. So I decide at this point, he does the same thing. I want you to die. I make a judgment call as a game master. I do something outside the rules, and what I've decided is it's kind of, sort of held. You can have an attack at advantage against it. It's only be for a round, and you're not going to do maximum damage to the thing. And so they start to ask, well, how come this is working differently? Because last time it worked like this, and now it's working like that. Start pulling my covers as I'm changing the deal. It's funny because somebody asked a question in the 5th edition forum on Facebook today, which I still have to turn off because most of the discussion in there makes me want to pull my hair out. But somebody's asking about, about rules as written, and should we play rules as written, or who cares? And so I ask in there, well, gosh, if you decide not to play rules as written, you decide to alter the rules, what's the criteria you're using for altering the rules? And who gets to alter the rules? Can anybody make a motion to alter the rules? Is it done by committee, or is just one person, is just one person able to alter the rules? If that's the case, if it's a game master, can the players ask him? Does the game master owe them an explanation of why you changed the rules in this particular case? And it's funny because that's exactly what I did here. I changed the rules. I changed the rules because it felt right in this particular situation. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just what I happen to do here. And the kids are asking about it. Why'd you do that? How come this works differently for this critter than it did for the, how come it works differently for the girl than it does for the boys? And, I can say, well, it's more powerful. It's bigger, which I said. It's harder for that spell to work on her. But that's not in the rules. That's something that Ivan just made up because it felt right. It didn't feel, it's part of my idiom of Dungeons and Dragons, which I'll talk about, I think, in the other series at some point. It didn't feel right because that's not how Dungeons and Dragons felt to me, and that's not how Hold Person worked. It didn't work on everything. After a while, it no longer worked on certain critters, and and maybe I should have had it be Hold Monster. I let him use the spell, but I let him use it, and it was a weaker version of the spell. She failed her save, but different things happened. And so I find that kind of interesting that the kids were challenging me. They're paying really close attention on something. It's really weird, though, because they still can't figure out, what do I add to my roll? Do I use a D20 to do this? But boy, are they watching what I do in terms of rulings, in terms of like how things actually work on the other end. Really kind of interesting now that I think of it. After that, they managed to kill that, and of course, there's this big spiral stone staircase with steps much bigger than a human, would be able to use. So they're trying to work their way down the steps, and finally at the very end, I think it goes down 400 feet, and they drop torches to see how big it was. They actually cast continual light on the ranger's sword. One of the rangers is a dragonborn, the only one that doesn't have dark vision. Everybody else has dark vision, but he is the light source. So now he has this cool sword which has flame, but doesn't actually burn anything. Kind of cool. A cool version of the continual light spell. I like that quite a bit. So he puts it in the scabbard and no longer sheds any light. And it answers the question. No, it doesn't shine outside the container that's put in. Remember that really perpetual, perennial discussion about how light and continual light work, and do they shine? Does the sphere, go through the wall? Does it? Man, I can see the discussions on that. I've seen it. They're ridiculous. Anyhow, they solved that part. So kudos to them with that. At the very end, they're on one of the landings, and a Grick grabs one of the red shirts. And so the red shirt by the name of Bugs, well, he gets grabbed, and he says, help. And so I kind of show him what it looks like, minus the beak, because I kind of put my finger right there. They have no clue what this creature is. I didn't say what it was. I just said these tentacles, and you can see how that worm kind of thing. But here's what it kind of looks like. And I kind of put my finger right over the beak part, and they say, and here he is saying help. And they asked if he was using their nickname names, because at one point, I mentioned something about the people saying it looked like maybe Scaly needs something. It looks like you guys, we're still here because Scaly needs to get help for that little mark on his head. That's the Dragonborn. And then they say, well, what do they call everybody else? And so we had a little bit of fun making up some nicknames that kind of were based on how they act. The Druid was just Shorty because he's a gnome. The Dwarf was Bossy or Grumpy because that's kind of how that player acts very often. He's really gets upset when other people don't do what he wants, and he's fairly bossy. And they all kind of laughed, including the player. When I said that, I think the young lady that's the other ranger was Loudmouth, because she tends to start to talk over everybody when she gets excited. And what the heck was the other one? I forget. Sneaky, because the Drow rogue is kind of like that. The player stays in the background an awful lot. He's really savvy, but very often he lets other people take the lead. They all kind of like the nicknames. I don't think any of them had their feelings hurt about it. Because I think they're kind of watching each other and because they'll make comments about how each other play as well. So we had a little bit of fun with that. But I had to be really careful not to hurt any feelings either. But it's been neat to see how their personalities are kind of gelling. And they're not character personalities; they're role player personalities. They're definitely much playing avatars of themselves or what have you. They're nowhere near the actual role playing a character. What is this guy actually really like? They're kind of playing. I have a suspicion that whatever character they play is going to be like the character they're playing right now. So it was fun. But the big takeaway from the session really was how much they're watching me and how much they're watching the rulings I'm making. Does this stack up? Is this working the same way it worked before? Because they'll ask about other spells. Can I use this here? Can I use that there? We'll look them up together and say, okay, I think that's really kind of pushing it here. It would work that way. Or if you cast this Hail of Thorn spell, well, you're really not going to be able to attack until the next round. We're looking at that kind of stuff up. But man, when I make a judgment call, they notice. And that's pretty interesting. Take it easy, kids. I will talk to you later.